Okay. Amr, can you check the power on the camera?
It's okay, it's hard to open. You can try the other door.
That's the problem.
Yeah, it's just not plugged in correctly.
Nabil, the AC is broken. We'll just wait another 30 seconds for the camera to boot up. Shoot. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, as-salatu was-salam ala Rasulullah. First of all, we say Alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to reach the first night of the first 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to what He loves and accepts, and that He guides us to achieving the maximum reward from these 10 nights. Inshallah, tonight we will carry on with the series of the stories of the Sahaba. And today is again another one of the great Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. And it is the story of Abu Ubaidah. Abu Ubaidah Amir ibn al-Jarrah. And his full name, everybody knows him as Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. Nobody knows his first name, and a lot of his name is missed out. People know as Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. And his first name is Amir ibn Abdullah ibn al-Jarrah ibn Hilal ibn Uhayb ibn Dubba ibn al-Harith ibn Fihr. So he connects with the Prophet ﷺ with the great grandfather of Fihr. So they're from the same Quraysh, they're from the core of the Quraysh. And he's known as Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah or Amir ibn al-Jarrah, while his father's name is Abdullah. But nobody refers to him by Amir ibn Abdullah. They go to the grandfather. And some people say that this is possibly because, as we'll find out, Abdullah was very hostile to Amir's Islam. And again, he's one of the great Sahaba who started early, who saw the truth and immediately accepted Islam. He was So we know that the story of the Prophet ﷺ, when he came down from Ghar Hira, Khadija was the first believer. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh was the first youth. The first man was, who was? Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. And then the first 10 after Abu Bakr, there's a lot of back and forth. But on the very next day after Abu Bakr accepted Islam, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh brought 5 men with him to the Prophet ﷺ to give the Shahada and the Bay'ah. And those 5 men are Abu Salama radiallahu anh, Uthman ibn Mad'un radiallahu anh, Al-Arqam ibn Abi Al-Arqam, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. So these 5 were among the first 10 to 12 people to accept Islam as a whole. And as soon as Abu Ubaidah, who was a prominent man in his tribe, prominent in his family, he held a lot of promise, as soon as he became Muslim, his father started torturing him. Cut him off, started torturing him, imprisoning him, beating him up, disgracing him wherever he went. And because of that, Abu Ubaidah was among the first people who did the first hijrah to Al-Habasha, to Abyssinia. So he left Mecca and went to Abyssinia. And a few years later, came back to Mecca, was prosecuted even further until the order came to migrate to Medina, and he was among the Sahaba that migrated to Medina. And when he came to Medina, again, he rose in prominence, he rose in importance, he rose in value to the Muslim Ummah because of his character. And we'll talk about his character in a second. But one of the first points where Abu Ubaidah stands out greatly is in the Battle of Badr, where Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh, everybody's on the battlefield. And this battle was super unique and super stressful and caused a lot of anxiety because it was mostly brothers and cousins and sons fighting each other. It's the same tribe. It's a battle between Quraysh that did Hijrah, supported by the Ansar, and Quraysh of Mecca. And it was common that a man would face his father or a father would face his sons in the battlefield. And a lot of the Sahaba avoided these confrontations. In the case of Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh, wherever he went, his father would be in front of them. Wherever he went, he would see his father, he would turn around and go to the other side of the battlefield, and his father would follow him, try to kill him. Over and over and over and over. And then they say in the narrations that they were cornered, he had nowhere to go, he had to fight his father. And he ended up killing his father, his own father. And the Mufassirin say that there's an ayah in Surah Al-Mujadila that came down narrating that situation. Or it applies to that situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لا تجد قوما يؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر يودون من حاد الله ورسوله. You will not find people who believe in Allah and the day of judgment who love the ones who are fighting against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and who are fighting the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what his father was doing, actively fighting, trying to kill the Prophet, trying to kill the companions, trying to kill Islam. So part of that defense, he actually killed his own father. And then later on, he fought in the Battle of Uhud. Again, in the forefront, he was among the few men, about a dozen men that stayed with the Prophet ﷺ during the Battle of Uhud. And he remained with the Prophet ﷺ until they went to a place. Today, if you go to Medina, if you go to Jabal Uhud, there's a cave called Ghar al-Khuda. And it's basically where the Prophet ﷺ, after he was injured, they took him up the mountain, and there's a little kahf, a little hole, where the Prophet ﷺ was sitting there with 12 men or 13 men, and they were cleaning up the wounds, and they were drinking from small, gathering of water on the mountain. And in that place, that's when Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh saw the injury of the Prophet ﷺ, where his armor, two rings of his armor got embedded into the bone of his cheek. And he was bleeding and his tooth was broken, ﷺ. So Abu Ubaidah, he's like, nobody touch him, I'll take care of him. And he goes and he bites on the rings, the metal rings that are embedded in the bone, and he pulls them out with his teeth. And he bit so hard that he lost his front teeth. And basically they call him an atam. But he was so proud of this disability because he did it while he's helping heal the Prophet ﷺ, while he was in contact with the blessed flesh of the Prophet ﷺ. And soon after, the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith mentioned that he was one among the 10 men who were promised Jannah. He was one of the 10 who were promised Jannah. And his characteristic, the way he looks and the way he behaves, reflects again his behavior. Radiallahu anh, he was skinny, just not too skinny, not too fat, just normal. And his face, you could see the veins, like the seriousness on his face. And he was tall, light bearded, narrow shouldered, not too wide, and he was missing his teeth. And they used to say that his face had a light about it, so wherever he went, people would be attracted to him because of his look. He was good looking, he was comfortable to look at, he didn't have any outstanding features. And he was very, very humble, very shy, and he was famous for husn al-khuluq, for being good-mannered and humble and so on. Later, there was a mission that came from Najran, from southern Arabia, and these were Christians that lived in the mountains that came to Medina to talk to the Prophet ﷺ. And they discussed with the Prophet ﷺ, and they agreed basically on living under the rule of Islam and agreed on jizya. And then they're like, okay, but when we go back to our people and we tell them this, they're going to be like, you're going to take our money, what's the deal? Muhammad, because they're Christian, they didn't believe he was the messenger of Allah, they said, Muhammad, والسلام, send with us someone who is trustworthy, someone who's truthful to guide us. And the Prophet ﷺ, sitting among the Sahaba, said, I will send with you someone, Jaddu Amin, Jaddu Amin, Jaddu Amin. He said it 3 times. I will send with you somebody who is truly, truly honest and honorable. He said it 3 times. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh narrates, he's like, you can see the Sahaba, their heads are rising, they're like, is it me? Is it me? They want that honor, the shahada of the Prophet ﷺ, that they are trustworthy and honorable. And he took the hand of Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh and raised it, and he sent them with him to Najran to teach the people who became Muslim, to teach the people the jizya, and to basically kind of get their things in order. Later, after a few years, the Prophet ﷺ made him the Amir, the leader of a small battalion of 300 men. And this is when things were difficult. This is when Islam was still being established. This is when Medina was, fending for itself, the Ahzab, Khaybar, and so on. So he sends 300 men to go and attack scouts of Quraysh that are protecting the caravans of Quraysh, the business of Quraysh. And they're trying to basically get their money back from Quraysh. So they go out, and all the Prophet ﷺ had as sustenance for 300 men was a single bag of dates. And it's basically a bag made out of leather, and they stuff it with dried dates to keep it from getting moldy. And that was the sustenance for 300 men. And this is a march in the desert. So they start walking in the desert. And Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, he's like, we got to ration this food, we can't eat it. So the ration was the daily meal for a soldier marching was a single date. Every day they would eat 1 date. And what they did, radiallahu anhum, they would put it in their cheek and drink water slowly. So they would suck on it for most of the day. And then when all of the sugar had gone, they would chew it. They would chew whatever is left of it, the fibers, for the rest of the day. When evening comes, they would swallow it, drink some more water, and go to sleep. So all they had to eat was a single date per day. And that ran out as well. So what did they do? They started going and seeing any desert trees. And they used to eat a thing, they call it al-khabat. Al-khabat is from the word khabata, or khabt. Basically, they would take their spears or their sticks and they would hit the tree so that some leaves would fall down, and they would crush those with water or whatever, and again, put it in their mouth and try to get any kind of sustenance from it. So they were really starving on this mission. And then they say we headed towards the ocean, trying to intercept this caravan, because there's a road that comes from Sham that passes by the Red Sea. So we head towards the Red Sea, and on our way back, we see a huge mass on the shore. And we thought it was a piece of a mountain or a small hill or a mound. And they say they kept walking to it, and it turns out it's a whale that had washed onto shore. And subhanAllah, as soon as Abu Ubaidah saw it, again, he's thinking about his taqwa, he's thinking about his connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, لا تأكلوا إنه ميتة. Do not eat. This is a creature that had died. And for a split second he says that, and then immediately says, Kulu, eat. We are starving. We're on a mission to, on the order of the Prophet ﷺ, so we eat. And they say that they ate. And again, the narrations, these are not hadith, these are riwayat. So the narrations, some could be accurate, some could be inaccurate. But the Sahaba used to say that they would cut pieces of meat from this whale as big as a bull. And they would slice it up and hang it and dry it. And they said there was so much fat on this whale that they used to use its eye socket as a bowl and use qilal, which are basically clay pots, to fill whale oil from the eye socket. And there's another narration that Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, he put 13 men, he sat them in the eye socket. That's how huge this whale was. And the narration is that they stayed by this whale between 20 and 30 days, and they ate nothing but whale for a month. And they said that we even got fat, saminna. And then they marched back to Medina. And when they got to Medina, immediately Abu Ubaidah went to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, this and this happened, and there was a mayta that came out of the ocean, and we ate from it, all of us. And the Prophet ﷺ said that this is a blessing, a ambar, a hoot, or a whale that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought out for you, so you may eat from it. And he asked, he's like, didn't you bring me a piece? So they immediately went to the Sahaba who had some of the dried whale meat and brought it to the Prophet ﷺ, and he ate from it. And from there, maytatul bahr, there's a hadith that carries through that anything that dies in the ocean is halal, even if it's a whale or a dolphin or mammals. If it's from the ocean, it's halal, maytatul bahr. So that's an interesting story. Another story later, when the Muslims were battling the Romans, and you have Amr ibn al-As with the Muslims, and the Romans I think he had 10,000 and the Romans had 100,000, and they had chained their soldiers together so they don't run away. That's a salasid. And Amr ibn al-As got a little concerned because the numbers are way off. You're a tenth of the army in front of you. So he sends a letter to Umar ibn al-Khattab quickly requesting madad, requesting support. So to the Prophet ﷺ, not Umar ibn al-Khattab. So the Prophet ﷺ sends Abu Ubaidah as the Amir, and he sends under him Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr, and I think Zubair, and a few other of the great Sahaba, the great warriors of Islam. And they march to support this army. And they get to Al-Yarmouk, and they go to Amr ibn al-As, and they walk up to him. And immediately the soldiers are like, oh, we are the Sahaba, we are the Muhajirin, we came to support you guys out here. This is our Amir, you're Amir on your people. And Amr ibn al-As was like, no, I'm the Amir of the army, the entire army. What are you talking about? And the main reason that there was a back and forth here was Amr ibn al-As had been Muslim for about 4 years at this point. 4 years ago, he was fighting the Prophet ﷺ. So his position was a lot weaker politically, and you have, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah on the head of the oldest, greatest Sahaba coming to support you. So people were expecting that he would step down. And so Abu Ubaidah, again, in his wisdom, in his humbleness, in his obedience to the Prophet ﷺ, pulls Amr ibn al-As to the side and he says, Ya Amr, let me teach you. The Prophet ﷺ told me, idhab wa tatawa'a, means go meet with Amr and find a way to agree to each other. And me, inni muti'uk, I will obey you. So he let down the entire controversy by giving up his leadership, his amara upon the Sahaba, and allowing them to roll into the big army, and the Muslims in that battle were successful. So in this example, his ego and his 20 plus years of Islam, being a Muslim 20 years longer than this guy and fighting with the Prophet every battle, he let his ego down and he said, the Prophet ﷺ ordered us to find an agreement, and the easiest agreement is for me to let it go. I'm not here seeking glory, I'm not here seeking, the show. I'm here to fight for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Abu Ubaidah remained in Sham. He remained in Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, in that area for the rest of his life, fighting the Romans, laying siege to Damascus, laying siege to Al-Quds. And when Al-Quds was opened, the story was that they demanded that Umar ibn al-Khattab would come to get the keys and they would surrender. And when Umar ibn al-Khattab came and they surrendered, he went to visit Abu Ubaidah in the little hut or whatever he was staying. And he walks in there and he sees the dir', the armor hanging on the wall, the sword hanging on the wall, a small piece of leather where the hairs on it were even faded from use. And there was a clay pot filled with water, covered with a dry piece of bread. That's it. That's his entire living. That's his entire furniture. And Umar ibn al-Khattab, his eyes tear up and he tells him, what is this, ya Abu Ubaidah? And he says, هَذَا كَافٍ لِلْمَقِيلِ. And when I read that, I was thinking, what does that mean? And then when you look at the meaning of the word al-maqil comes from the word of qaylula. In traditions in the Middle East or in Arabia, people would wake up at Fajr and take a nap during the hottest part of the day. And Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anhu was telling Umar ibn al-Khattab, all these things, these few things that I have are enough for me to reach that qaylula as a metaphor of death. This is all that I'm going to need to get me to my qaylula until the day of judgment, subhanAllah. So he was very, very humble. He was very disconnected from this life against himself, but he was also extremely just and extremely fair and extremely caring for the poor and for the orphans and so on. And a few years later, Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh led the Muslims with Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh in conquering Damascus. And they conquered Damascus, the rest of Syria, and he was appointed the ruler upon Syria. And he ruled with great justice. The Christians were happy, the Jews of the area were happy, the pagans of the area were happy. Everybody, was ruling by justice. And Umar ibn al-Khattab would always send him letters, do this, don't do this, what happened here. So he was one of the favored rulers of Umar ibn al-Khattab. A few years later, there was a great plague, Ta'un Amwas. And in this plague, about 25,000 Muslims or 25,000 people started dying. They would develop basically sores on their body, and they would, be filled with pus and whatever, and anybody who touched them would get it and they would die. So as soon as they heard the news, Umar ibn al-Khattab immediately wrote a quick letter to Abu Ubaidah, and he's like, I need you here now. I need you for something urgent, please come now, as soon as you receive the letter. And Abu Ubaidah receives the letter and he's like, okay, he understood what's going on. Umar ibn al-Khattab is trying to get him to leave the land before he gets the ta'un, before he gets the plague. And Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anhu wrote in the letter, he said, what you're asking me to do, you're asking me to leave what is inevitable. You're asking me to escape something that I'm not going to be able to escape. And I came here as a leader of my men and as a leader of these soldiers, and I will face whatever destiny awaits them and us. And when the letter came to Umar ibn al-Khattab, he held it and he cried. And the Sahaba, or the people in Medina, panicked. They're like, is he dead? Is Abu Ubaidah, has he died? And he's like, no, but he will soon. So he kind of, Abu Ubaidah was kind of feeling that his end was nearing, and Umar ibn al-Khattab could read it in the notes. A few days later, the Muslims agreed, there was a consensus to basically spread out in the mountains and the villages to stop this from spreading. And it is said that as Abu Ubaidah was getting on his horse, he noticed one of the sores on his leg, and he's like, I got this, I'm not leaving. And he gets sick, and it is said that between 3 to 5 days people would be dead. So when he got sick, he gathered his wazirs and basically told them to write his wasiyah, and he said, "Inni muwsikum biwasiyatin in qabiltumuha lan tazalu bi khair." I'm giving you a will or a reminder. If you accept it, you will be good. You will maintain this goodness that you have. And he said, "Aqimus salah," maintain your prayers, and uphold your prayers. وَصُومُوا شَهْرَ رَمَضَانَ, and fast the month of Ramadan. وَتَصَدَّقُوا, and give charity. وَحِجُّوا وَاعْتَمِرُوا, so go, do your hajj and do your umrah. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْخَيْرِ فِيمَا بَيْنِكُمْ, so give good advice to each other, and make sure that you're commanding it upon each other to do good. وَانصَحُوا لِأُمَرَائِكُمْ وَلَا تَغَشُّوهُمْ, and give advice to your leaders and do not cheat them. Do not tell them, oh, you're great and dandy or whatever, like we see today, where you have a horrible person ruling, and he has a group of the entourage just clapping wherever he goes. And then the next piece of advice, وَلَا تُلْهِكُمُ الدُّنْيَا, and do not get caught up in dunya. Do not let dunya take you away, because if a person was to live 1,000 years, there's nothing that he can do except he will end up fi masra'i hada, waiting on his deathbed, waiting for his soul to leave his body. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And this is the last advice that he gave. And when radiallahu anhu passed away, and he was placed in his grave, the people cried, but his Khalifa, is it Sa'd ibn Mu'adh or Mu'adh ibn Jabal? Yeah, so Mu'adh ibn Jabal was his replacement, and he said, this man, he's like, you have been struck and burdened by the loss of this man, for he's one of the greatest men that walked the earth. Radiallahu anhu. And there's so many different hadiths and narrations and stories about the manaqib of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. I'll just mention a couple. The first one is after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, and they were in the Saqifa, and they were talking about who's going to be the Khalifa. Abu Bakr, there was a back and forth between Ansar and Muhajirin, who has the more right. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh walked in and he grabbed the hand of Abu Ubaidah and he grabbed the hand of Umar ibn Khattab and he says, here are two men, choose one of them. And Abu Ubaidah, people looked at him and was like, what do you say? He says, O people of Ansar, O the people who supported the Prophet ﷺ, you are the first who supported the Prophet ﷺ. Don't be the first who changed the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Once he said that, the people calmed down and they immediately started coming and giving bay'ah to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. And they say that was the first great fitna that the Muslim ummah faced, and that was the first fitna that they faced, and that was kind of diffused by Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh. Later the Sahaba and Tabi'in would go to Aisha radiallahu anha and they would ask her, O Aisha al-Mu'mineen radiallahu anha, who was the most beloved to the Prophet ﷺ? And her answer was repeated. It was Abu Bakr, and then Umar ibn Khattab, and then Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh. And when Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh received the news of his death, the people in Medina cried and whatnot. A few months later, Umar ibn Khattab was stabbed in the masjid and he was dying. And they're like, Awsi, who's going to take over? You have to tell us who's going to take over after you. And he said, if I didn't know that he was dead, I would say Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anh should be the next Khalifa because of his laqab, because of his... so we know his name is Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, but his nickname was... He had two main nicknames, was Amirul Umara, the Prince of Princes, or the Leader of Leaders, because he was Amirul Umara on the armies in Sham. And the other one was the one that he loved the most, and it was Aminul Ummah. And the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith says, لِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ أَمِينٌ وَأَمِينُ أُمَّتِي هُوَ أَبُو عُبَيدَةٍ, that he is the trustworthy, the truthful one of my ummah. It is Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anh. And if I was thinking, again, maybe you guys can share your thoughts, but if I was going to think of a message to take away from the life of Abu Ubaidah, was how humble he was and how dedicated he was to Islam and the mission of Islam. He didn't, every opportunity there was for an argument, he would find a way to diffuse it. Any opportunity for competition, he would find a way to ease the competition and rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and rely on his mission to spread Islam and obey the Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam. So جزاكم الله خيرا على حسن استماعكم والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا.